After driving 8 hours through a blinding, relentless cyclonic blizzard with crippling, constant rheumatoid arthritis just to surprise my daughter for Christmas, I stood on her front porch and heard her laughing. "I hope his old truck slides off the road," she said loud and clear over the ambient holiday music. "I really do. I don't want that embarrassment parked in my driveway while our guests are here." I froze. My hand, swollen and gnarled, hovered inches from the doorbell bell I bought and installed myself. I didn't knock. I just walked back to my frozen truck, a rusted monument to my decades of labor, picked up my phone, and canceled her entire manufactured life. But before I tell you how I evicted my own daughter and her opportunistic husband from their own Christmas Eve party, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe family loyalty is a two-way street. My name is Elias Thorne, and at 69 years old, I have learned that the coldest place on earth isn't a Wyoming highway in December. It is the heart of a child who loves your wealth but despises your existence. The weatherman had called it the storm of the century, a bomb cyclone hitting the upper Midwest with 75 miles per hour winds and temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Any sane man my age would have stayed by the fire in his cabin, wrapped in a thick alpaca wool blanket with a glass of fine single malt bourbon. But I wasn't a sane man. I was a father who hadn't seen his only daughter, Cassandra, in 3 years. I was a grandfather who had missed his granddaughter, Olivia's, high school graduation because of a minor cardiac procedure I never told them about. So when the snow started falling sideways, I didn't turn off the lights. I loaded up my 23-year-old Ford pickup truck, a workhorse I call the Bison, and pointed it toward Minneapolis. The drive was a torture I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I have rheumatoid arthritis. It is not the kind that just makes you stiff in the morning. It is the kind that feels like someone has replaced your joint fluid with crushed glass and gasoline. Every vibration of the steering will send a jolt of fire up my wrists and into my shoulders. My knees were locked in a position of agony, unable to stretch in the cramped cab of the truck. But I kept driving. I kept driving because I had a picture in my head. I imagined walking through their front door, shaking the snow off my coat, and seeing Cassandra's face light up the way it did when she was 7 years old and I built her first treehouse. I imagined Bryce, my son-in-law, shaking my hand with genuine respect instead of that limp, dismissive grip he usually gave me. And Olivia, my sweet, brilliant Olivia. I imagined hugging her and telling her that her grandfather was finally here. Beside me on the passenger seat sat a hand tool box made of deep, figured black walnut. I'd spent the last 9 months building it in my shed, working through the pain, sanding the wood until it felt like polished stone. Inside that box wasn't just a trinket. Inside, tucked into a silver silk lining, was a cashier's check for $600,000. It was enough to pay off the remainder of their mortgage and cover Olivia's tuition at Princeton University for all 4 years, including room and board. I wanted to give them financial freedom. I wanted to see the relief in their eyes. I wanted to buy my way back into their hearts, not realizing that was a transaction no amount of money could settle. The heater in the truck rattled and wheezed, barely keeping the windshield clear of ice. I had to stop every 2 hours, not to rest, but to inject a heavy dose of anti-inflammatory medication into my thigh, just to keep my hands functioning. The needle hurt, but it was a dull ache, compared to the fire in my joints. Around hour 6, near the Iowa border, the wiper motor started to whine, threatening to give out. I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. "Just get me there," I whispered to the empty cab, my breath visible in the freezing air. "Just get me to my family, and I won't ask for anything else." I didn't tell them I was the chairman of Thorne Global Holdings. I didn't tell them that the very transport rigs passing me on the highway with the blue and white TGH logo belonged to a fleet I owned. To them, I was just Elias, the retired carpenter from Wyoming who lived on a fixed income and drove a rust bucket. I kept it that way to protect them, to keep them grounded. Or maybe I kept it that way to protect myself, to see if they would love the man without the corporate empire. By the time I reached the outskirts of Minneapolis, night had fallen and the city was a blur of white and gray. The GPS on my phone was the only thing keeping me on the road. My hands were clawed around the wheel, white-knuckled and trembling. When I finally turned onto the street where Cassandra lived, the pain was so intense I was seeing spots. But then I saw the house. It was a magnificent, sprawling Tudor-style estate sitting on 3 acres of prime suburban land. It glowed in the darkness with tasteful Christmas lights wrapping every tree and outlining the roof. I felt a surge of pride. I had bought that house through a confidential trust fund 7 years ago, renting it to them for $1 a year, though they believed they were paying a mortgage to a bank. I wanted them to have the best. The driveway was filled with luxury cars, Porsches, Maseratis, customized G-Wagons. My battered Ford looked like a scar on a beautiful face as I parked it on the street, afraid to block anyone in. I turned off the engine and the silence of the storm rushed in. The wind howled, shaking the frame of the truck. I took a deep breath, grabbed the black walnut box, and opened the door. The cold hit me like a physical blow. My knees protested as I stumbled, walking up the long, iced driveway. The snow was already ankle-deep, soaking through my old, leather boots. I could hear the music from inside. It was smooth, sophisticated jazz expensive. I could hear laughter, the clinking of glass, the murmur of a party in full swing. I reached the massive, oak-inlaid front door, my hand trembling not from the cold, but from anticipation. It was Cassandra's voice, sharp and clear, cutting through the laughter. "Oh God, is it 8 o'clock already?" she was saying. "He said he would be here by 8. I hope he got lost." I honestly hope he turned around and went back to his little shack in the woods. My heart skipped a beat. I waited, hoping someone would correct her, hoping Bryce would defend me. But then I heard Bryce's voice, booming and confident. "Don't worry, babe. If the old man shows up, we'll just shuffle him to the pantry. Tell him the main rooms are being prepped for the photo shoot. We can't have him wandering around upstairs with the silver circle investors here. Have you seen that jacket he wears? It smells like sawdust and old kerosene. It's depressing." The group of people they were talking to erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, mocking sound that tore through the heavy oak door and pierced right through my chest. I stood there, frozen. The snow was piling up on my shoulders, but I couldn't feel the cold anymore. I felt a different kind of numbness. A woman's voice I didn't recognize spoke up. "Is he really that bad?" "Your father." Cassandra sighed, a long, dramatic sound of exasperation. "He is an absolute liability. He drives this relic of a truck that looks like it survived a war. He has these gnarled, rough hands that look like tree roots. And he always brings these handmade wooden things as gifts. Last year, it was a clock tower replica." "A clock tower? I mean, what am I supposed to do with that trash?" I threw it in the recycling bin the moment he left. The air left my lungs. The clock tower. I had spent 3 months on that clock tower. It was a meticulous replica of the one in the center of their college campus, a reminder of where they met. She had thrown it away. She had thrown it away and laughed about it. I looked down at the black walnut box in my hands. The wood was smooth and warm from the heater in the truck. Inside was $600,000. Inside was their freedom. And to them, it was just another piece of kindling from a useless old man. Bryce laughed again, the sound of ice cracking. "Look, the plan is simple. He eats in the utility kitchen with the catering help. We tell him it's a holiday tradition or something. Then we put him in the downstairs den on the pull-out sofa. Tomorrow morning, we give him some gas money and send him on his way. I just hope his car breaks down before he gets here. It would save us the smell of his workshop." I leaned my forehead against the cold wood of the door. My eyes were dry. At 69, you don't cry when your heart breaks. You just feel it turn to stone. I listened to my daughter, the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders through the deep snow, agree with him. "You're right, Bryce. If he calls saying he is stuck, we just don't answer. Let him figure it out. He is used to being miserable and self-sufficient." That was it. The final sentence, the period at the end of our relationship. They didn't just see me as a burden. They saw me as something less than human. They were willing to let me freeze on the side of the road to protect their social standing and perceived exclusivity. I looked at the expensive, gilded wreath hanging on the door with its crimson velvet bow and faux gold berries. It looked like a lie. Everything inside that house was a lie, funded by my money, sustained by my silent generosity. I slowly bent down. my stiff knees protesting, a sharp, agonizing pain that nearly made me black out. But I gritted my teeth and didn't make a sound. I placed the black walnut box on the welcome mat. It sat there, heavy and perfect against the dark, iron rubber. Then, with fingers that felt like frozen sausages, I opened the latch. I reached inside and took out the envelope containing the cashier's check. I slipped the check into the inner pocket of my heavy canvas coat, right next to my heart. I closed the box, leaving it empty. Just a wooden shell, just like their promises, just like their love. I stood up. The wind was whipping the snow into a frenzy around me, burying my tracks as fast as I made them. I looked at the windows, seeing the silhouettes of people holding wine glasses, warm and safe and arrogant. They were drinking wine that I paid for in a house that I owned, wearing clothes bought with a substantial monthly allowance I deposited into Cassandra's account every month under the guise of a family trust dividend. They thought they were self-made. They thought they were superior. They were about to find out just how cold the world really was when the sun stopped shining. I turned around and walked back to my truck. I didn't look back. I climbed into the driver's seat, and the familiar smell of old leather and coffee grounded me. I reached into the glove box and pulled out my emergency medical kit. I didn't hesitate. I filled a syringe with a high dose of cortisol and painkillers. I unbuckled my belt and jabbed the needle into my thigh right through the fabric of my thermal underwear. I gritted my teeth as the medicine burned its way in. I needed to be clear. I needed to be strong. I needed the pain to stop because I had work to do. I started the engine. The old Ford roared to life, a defiant growl in the silent suburb. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen was bright in the dark cab. I scrolled past Cassandra's contact, past Bryce's contact. I found a number I hadn't dialed in a personal capacity in years. It was a number reserved for crises, for hostile takeovers, for nuclear options. Jonathan Reed, my personal general counsel, and the only man who knew exactly how much Elias Thorne was worth. It was Christmas Eve. Most lawyers were with their families. Jonathan picked up on the second ring. "Elias," he said, his voice sharp and alert. "Is everything all right? Are you in Minneapolis?" "I'm in Minneapolis, Jonathan," I said. My voice was steady, calm, colder than the blizzard outside. "Do you need a hotel?" Jonathan asked. "I can have the presidential suite at the Grand Millennium prepared in 15 minutes. "I will need the presidential," I said, staring at the glowing windows of my daughter's house. "But first, I need you to open the laptop. We are activating the judgment protocol." There was a pause on the other end of the line. A heavy silence. Jonathan knew what that meant. It was the scorched earth policy. It was the document we had drafted 7 years ago when I set up the trusts, the safety net designed to be pulled out from under them if they ever proved themselves unworthy. We had joked about it back then, calling it the ingratitude clause. It wasn't a joke anymore. "The judgment protocol," Jonathan repeated. "Are you sure, Elias?" Once I hit enter, the banking system updates immediately. It is Christmas Eve. They will be completely cut off. No cards, no utilities, no access to the trust accounts. The eviction notice goes out automatically to the sheriff's department. I watched a shadow move across the window of the house. It was Cassandra laughing, her head thrown back, probably mocking my truck again. "I am sure," I said. "Do it. Do it now." "Very well," Jonathan said, the professional mask sliding back into place. "Initiating judgment. I will meet you at the Millennium in an hour. Stay safe, Elias." I ended the call. I put the truck in gear. As I pulled away from the curb, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a strange, grim satisfaction. The pain in my joints was fading, replaced by the adrenaline of a man who has finally decided to stop being the victim. They wanted me to be the poor old man. They wanted me to be the helpless inconvenience. Fine. I would show them what happens when the poor old man owns the bank. I drove into the night, leaving the empty wooden box on their doorstep, a silent Trojan horse that signaled the end of their world. The snow was blinding as I merged onto the main highway, and the city skyline rose up like a fortress of ice and steel, with lights blurring in the storm. My heater was failing again, spitting out lukewarm air that smelled of burnt dust. And I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, my arthritis screaming with every shift of the gears. But my destination was clear. The Grand Millennium Hotel, an icon of Minneapolis luxury, a place where CEOs and dignitaries slept. And tonight, a place where an old carpenter in a rust bucket truck was about to make an entrance. I pulled up to the main entrance of the Grand Millennium, where the polished brass revolving doors gleamed under the canopy, and the valet stand was busy with black limousines and SUVs that cost more than my cabin in Wyoming. I eased my 23-year-old Ford in behind a pristine Rolls-Royce Ghost, and the engine sputtered and died with a loud backfire that sounded like a gunshot in the refined atmosphere. I saw two valets in thick, insulated coats exchange a look of pure disdain. One of them, a young man with a headset, marched toward my window before I even opened the door. "Sir, you cannot park here," he shouted over the wind, tapping aggressively on the glass. "This is a private zone for hotel guests only, and deliveries are around the back in the alley. You need to move this immediately." I opened the door, forcing my stiff legs to move, and stepped out onto the red carpet. My worn work boots left muddy, slush prints on the expensive fabric. My canvas coat was old, frayed at the cuffs, and I hadn't shaved in 3 days. I looked exactly like what Cassandra said I was, an embarrassment. An old man from the woods who didn't belong in civilization. "I'm a guest," I said, my voice raspy from the dry air in the truck. "I need someone to park this, and be careful with the clutch because it is sticky in second gear." The valet laughed, a short bark of disbelief. "Look, pal, I don't know if you're confused or just looking for a warm place to sleep, but this isn't a shelter. You need to move this scrap heap right now, or I am calling the police to have it towed. We have high net worth clients arriving tonight, and we can't have this thing blocking the entrance." I looked at him and saw he was just a kid doing his job, judging the book by its cover, just like my daughter had. I didn't get angry. Instead, I just reached into my inner coat pocket, past the check I had taken back from Cassandra. My fingers fumbled slightly because of the cold and the pain, but I found what I was looking for. It wasn't a credit card. It was a heavy rectangle made of solid, anodized tantalum, rare metal matte black with no numbers, just a small silver chip and my signature laser engraved on the back. The executive founder's card. There were only 5 of them in existence, issued strictly to the original investment group that had financed the entire hotel. Chain's initial public offering 25 years ago. It didn't just grant access, it granted ownership privileges. I held it out between 2 gloved fingers, and the valet stared at it, confused, probably having never seen one before, reaching for his radio, likely to call security. "Sir, last warning. Move the truck. Run it," I said quietly. "Just run the card, son. Unless you want to explain to Mr. Harrington why you turn away a founding charter member on Christmas Eve." The name of the general manager made him pause. He snatched the card with a sneer and walked over to his podium, watching his body language change as he swiped it. He looked at the screen, then looked closer, tapping it frantically as if trying to clear a system error before going pale. He looked back at me, standing in the snow in my ragged coat, and he looked terrified. He grabbed his radio, but this time his voice was a whisper. "Mr. Harrington." "Sir, we have a code tantalum at the front entrance." "Yes, sir." "Is the founder's card?" "Yes, sir." 2 minutes later, the revolving door spun, and a man in an immaculate, dark velvet tuxedo came running out without a coat, ignoring the freezing wind. It was Arthur Harrington, the general manager. I had hired him 20 years ago when he was just a concierge, and he saw me without seeing the old clothes or the dirty truck. He saw the man who signed his paychecks. "Mr. Thorne," he gasped, rushing forward to take my hand. "My God, Elias, is that you? We weren't expecting you. The system just alerted us. Why didn't you call ahead?" "Hello, Arthur," I said, gripping his hand as firmly as my arthritis would allow. "It was a last-minute decision, and the weather is turning, so I need a room." "A room?" Arthur laughed nervously, waving at the valet who was now standing at attention, looking like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. "You don't need a room, Mr. Thorne. The presidential penthouse is vacant. It is always vacant for you." He turned to the young valet who was trembling, holding my black card like it was a holy relic. "Park Mr. Thorne's vehicle. Put it in the heated basement garage and treat it with more care than that Rolls-Royce. Do you understand?" Yes, sir, the boy squeaked, jumping into the driver's seat of my Ford. Arthur guided me toward the doors, his hand hovering respectfully at my elbow. Let's get you out of this cold. You look like you have driven through hell, Elias. I have, Arthur, I said, stepping into the warmth of the lobby, the smell of fresh cedar and expensive perfume washing over me. I have driven through hell, but I am out now. As we walked across the marble floor, guests in silk gowns and velvet suits turned to stare, seeing an old man in dirty boots walking next to the manager and whispering behind their hands, wondering how a beggar had gotten past security. They didn't know that the custom-designed chandeliers above their heads, the marble beneath their feet, and the very building that sheltered them from the storm belonged to the portfolio of Thorne Global Holdings. Arthur led me to the private elevator, the one that required a biometric scan. He pressed his thumb to the pad as the doors slid open. Reed called the front desk 5 minutes ago, Arthur said as we began the ascent to the 45th floor. He said he is on his way, and he mentioned something about the judgment protocol. I leaned back against the deep velvet wall of the elevator, closing my eyes as the pressure in my knees began to ease in the warmth. Yes, Arthur, it is going to be a busy night. I need a bottle of the Macallan 55 and a ribeye steak, seared Pittsburgh rare. And Arthur, make sure no one disturbs us. Not even family. Especially not family. Understood, Mr. Thorne, Arthur said, his face hardening because he knew the history he knew about Cassandra and he didn't ask questions. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened directly into the penthouse, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the frozen lake and the city lights. It was a palace of silence and power. Far below, in the suburbs, the lights of my daughter's house were glowing. I walked to the window, looking down at the city that was about to teach my children a very hard lesson. I was no longer the freezing father on the doorstep. I was the chairman, and the board meeting had just begun. I submerged myself in the steaming water of the oversized marble tub in the penthouse master bathroom, letting the heat seep into my frozen joints. The pain that had been screaming in my knees and wrists for the last 8 hours began to dull, retreating into a manageable throb. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind howl against the reinforced glass of the 45th floor. Outside, it was a whiteout, a blizzard that was burying Minneapolis under a foot of ice. Inside, I was safe. I was warm, but my mind was miles away in the suburbs, focused on a Tudor-style mansion that was currently glowing with warmth I had paid for. My phone rested on the marble ledge next to a glass of 55-year-old scotch. It buzzed, vibrating against the stone. It was Jonathan. I picked it up, my hand steady now, the tremors of the drive gone. "We are ready, Elias," Jonathan said, his voice crisp and devoid of holiday cheer. "The utility companies have been contacted. The credit card issuers have been notified. The banking servers have processed the freeze. All we need is the final authorization code." I took a sip of the scotch, letting the amber liquid burn a path down my throat. I imagined Cassandra at that moment. She was probably holding court in the great room, maybe making another joke about my old coat or my rough hands while pouring vintage wine for Bryce's business partners. They were celebrating their success, their status, their perfect life, a life built on a foundation of sand that I had solidified for them year after year. "Execute," I said softly. "Code 0. Cut it all, Jonathan. Let them see what the dark looks like." "Done," Jonathan replied. "Merry Christmas, Elias." I hung up and set the phone down. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel remorse. I felt like a surgeon removing a gangrenous limb. It was necessary. It was overdue. 20 miles west in the wealthy enclave of Westwood Hills, the party was reaching its crescendo. I know this because I know the schedule of the house I built. The catering staff would be serving the main course right now. Prime Colorado rack of lamb and seared scallops. The surround sound system would be playing classic holiday crooners, filling the high ceilings of the great room with festive noise. Bryce would be standing by the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a crystal tumbler, playing the part of the lord of the manor. And then, in a single heartbeat, the world ended. It didn't happen with a flicker or a warning. It was absolute and instantaneous. 1 second, the crystal chandeliers were blazing, casting prisms of light across the expensive art on the walls. The next second, they were plunged into a darkness so total it felt heavy. The music cut off mid-note, leaving a silence that was deafening. The hum of the refrigerator, the whir of the wine cooler, the soft purr of the state-of-the-art HVAC system pumping heat into the massive rooms, it all died at once. For a moment, there was only the sound of confusion, nervous laughter, the clinking of silverware on china in the pitch black. "What happened?" someone asked, their voice high and tight. Bryce's voice boomed through the darkness, annoyed but not yet afraid. "Just a blown fuse, folks. Or maybe a line down from the storm. Everyone stay calm." Cassandra grabbed the high-powered lantern from the pantry. I could imagine the scene as cell phone flashlights flickered on, cutting erratic beams through the dark room, creating long, dancing shadows that made the guests look like ghosts. The smart home panel on the wall, usually a glowing hub of information, was a dead black square. The electronic locks on the doors clicked audibly, engaging the fail-safe mode. Bryce marched toward the basement where the breaker box was located. He was probably cursing the storm, cursing the infrastructure, cursing anything but the truth. He flipped the main breaker back and forth. Nothing. He checked the backup generator, the $30,000 unit I had installed 4 years ago to ensure my granddaughter never had to be cold. It sat silent. It hadn't kicked on because the service contract hadn't been renewed. I had canceled it 15 minutes ago. The temperature in the house began to drop. It wasn't immediate, but the psychological effect of the cold was instant. The guests, used to the aggressive warmth of the central heating, started pulling their shawls tighter. The festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by the primal unease of being trapped in the dark during a blizzard. Cassandra came back into the room, her voice shrill. "The oven is off, Bryce. The lamb is sitting in a cold oven. The stove won't light. It's electric ignition. What is going on?" Bryce came back up from the basement, sweating despite the cooling air. "It is not the breakers," he announced, trying to sound authoritative in front of his boss and the investors. "It must be the grid. The storm probably took out a substation. I will call the power company and get an ETA. They usually prioritize this neighborhood." He pulled out his phone, the screen glowing on his anxious face. He dialed the priority support line for the electric company, a number he had because the account was flagged as high value. He put on speakerphone so everyone could hear him demand answers, so everyone could see him handle the situation like a man of influence. That was his mistake. The automated system didn't give him a wait time. It connected him directly to a night shift supervisor because the account status had changed from VIP to urgent disconnect. "This is Northern States Power Emergency Dispatch." The operator's voice crackled through the speaker, loud and clear in the silent room. "Can I have your account number?" "Please." Bryce rattled off the number he had memorized or thought he had. "This is Bryce Miller at 18 Pine Ridge Lane. The power is out, and I have a house full of guests. We need a crew out here immediately." There was the sound of typing on the other end. A pause. A long, uncomfortable pause. "Sir," the operator said, her voice changing from helpful to formal. "I see the outage at that address, but this isn't a storm-related incident." Bryce frowned, looking around at his guests, who were now watching him intently. "What do you mean it's not the storm? The whole block must be out." "No, sir," the operator corrected him. "Your neighbors have power. The grid is fully operational in your sector. This service was terminated remotely at 8:45 p.m. "Terminated?" Todd laughed, a nervous, barking sound. "That is ridiculous. I paid the bill last week. I have autopay. You guys made a mistake. Turn it back on right now, or I am suing you for every frozen pipe in this house." "Sir, the bill isn't the issue," the operator said calmly. The service was disconnected at the specific request of the property owner. The room went dead silent. You could hear the wind rattling the window panes. Cassandra froze, her hand halfway to her mouth. "I'm the property owner," Bryce shouted, his face turning red in the pale light of the phone. "I am Bryce Miller. I have lived here for 7 years. Turn the damn lights on." "Sir, please lower your voice," the operator said, her tone hardening. "I am looking at the deed and the account registry right now. The property at 18 Pine Ridge Lane is owned by the Thorn Revocable Trust. The trustee, Mr. Elias Thorne, personally authenticated the disconnect order 30 minutes ago. He cited a violation of the occupancy agreement. Bryce stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. The phone slipped slightly in his sweaty grip. Mr. Thorne, the operator continued, unaware she was destroying a man's life on speakerphone, requested a full lockout electric, gas, and water. He also flagged the account for potential squatting. If you are still on the premises, sir, I am required to notify you that you are trespassing on a utility easement. The call ended with a click. The dial tone hummed in the silence. Every eye in the room was on Bryce. His boss, Mr. Sterling, was looking at him, not with sympathy, but with the cold calculation of a man realizing he has been lied to. Elias. Cassandra whispered the name like a curse. My father. My father. You said the house was in our name. You told me the paperwork went through years ago. You said the mortgage was paid off. Bryce looked at her, his arrogance stripping away layer by layer, leaving only panic. I thought it was, he stammered. He said it was a gift. He said we just had to handle the taxes. I didn't know he kept it in a trust. The house was getting colder. The guests began to stand up. The party was over. But for Cassandra and Bryce, the nightmare was just beginning. They were standing in the dark in a mansion that wasn't theirs, realizing that the old man they had mocked, the man they had hoped would freeze in his truck, held the switch to their entire universe. And he had just turned it off. The cold air in the great room was nothing compared to the frost settling over the social gathering. The guests huddled, their breath visible. The illusion of Cassandra and Bryce's perfect life had shattered along with the electricity. Still defiant, Cassandra announced she would book suites for everyone at the Four Seasons, attempting to salvage the party. She pulled out her American Express Centurion card and confidently dialed the concierge, putting the call on speakerphone for her influential guest to hear. The concierge politely attempted to process the transaction, but after a moment, his tone changed. Mrs. Miller, I am afraid I cannot process this transaction. The system is giving me a hard decline. Error code. Source account locked. Contact primary cardholder. Cassandra was stunned. She frantically tried Bryce's business Onyx card, which was also declined and flagged. Frozen by administrator. Every card was useless. They were supplementary accounts under the umbrella of Thorne Global Holdings, and Elias, the primary cardholder, had locked them all. The illusion was over. Mr. Sterling, Bryce's boss, was the first to excuse himself. The other guests quickly followed, their departure awkward and silent. They watched the dissolution of a lifestyle, desperate to get away from the failure. Cassandra and Bryce were left alone in the dark, in a house that wasn't theirs, with no money, no heat, and no one to blame. I watched the sun rise over Minneapolis from the warmth of the master suite. It was Christmas morning. At 7, Cassandra and Bryce emerged from the freezing house. They had spent the night arguing and left to find me, believing I was hiding in a cheap motel. They spent hours hunting for the poor carpenter they knew, unable to conceive that I was checking my security reports from the presidential penthouse. By 10 o'clock, frustration turned to panic. When they drove back toward the house, they found a fleet of black vans blocking the driveway. The vans bore the logo of Reed Legal Services, Asset Recovery Division. For men were drilling new locks. Bryce jumped out and confronted the team leader, Mr. Hayes, shouting about trespassing. Hayes calmly held out a document. This property belongs to the Thorne Revocable Trust, he stated. You have been residing here under a leasing agreement. The trustee, Mr. Elias Thorne, exercises right under Clause 4B, the Conduct and Character Clause, to terminate your residency as of last night at 8 p.m. Cassandra snatched the papers. They had signed a lease, not a deed, believing Bryce's lie about handling the lawyers. The clause allowed immediate termination for gross ingratitude and malice toward the trustee. You have been granted a 6-hour grace period to remove personal effects, Hayes said, ignoring their screams. He handed Cassandra a small white envelope. It wasn't a check or a reprieve. It was a brochure for a low-end, cash-only extended-stay motel on the city's outskirts, clipped with 2 one-way taxi vouchers. The final insult. They were not homeowners. They were disgraced, evicted tenants. The peace of the morning was shattered by the ringtone for Olivia, my granddaughter. She was sobbing, terrified. Mom said I have to call Princeton and decline my acceptance. She said I have to work double shifts at the bistro to pay market rate rent because the free ride is over. The thought of them crushing Olivia's brilliant future I had secured with an irrevocable educational trust to save their own lifestyle, was the final line crossed. They were parasites willing to cannibalize the innocent. Olivia, listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice steady. You are not declining Princeton. You're leaving that house. In 15 minutes, a car is going to pull into the driveway. When you see it, you walk out and get in. Do not stop. Do not let them stop you. Do you trust me? Yes, she whispered. I immediately called Arthur, the hotel manager, and ordered the Maybach Pullman, the hotel's fortified crown jewel, and 2 of his biggest security men. I watched the live feed on my tablet as the imposing Maybach glided onto the snowy driveway. Cassandra and Bryce stormed out, screaming at the driver, Victor. Then Olivia appeared with her bag. Where do you think you are going? Cassandra shrieked, grabbing Olivia's arm. We need that money. Don't you dare walk away from this family. Olivia pulled her arm away, a firm, final rejection. Bryce, slipping on the ice, pleaded, We need you. We are a team. Olivia looked back at her desperate parents. I'm going to Grandpa's, she said, loud enough for the car's mic to catch. He is the only one who ever acted like a parent. She ducked into the car, and Victor closed the solid door. As the Maybach drove away, leaving Cassandra and Bryce screaming insults at the tinted glass, I put the tablet down. The innocent was saved. Now it was time to deal with the guilty. I knew I had to take away the one thing Bryce thought he had earned on his own, his job. Bryce, sitting in the foul-smelling motel room, saw his career as his last lifeline. He called Jonathan Sterling, the CEO of Sterling and Finch, desperate to secure an emergency $75,000 draw against his bonus. There won't be a bonus, Bryce, Jonathan said flatly, and you won't be signing any paperwork on Monday. You are fired. Effective immediately. Bryce erupted in hysterical protests, threatening to sue and citing his senior VP title. You earn nothing, Jonathan snapped back. Your title was a pity title. The only reason you survived 3 rounds of massive layoffs is because I was ordered to keep you. Ordered by who? Bryce screamed, the blood draining from his face. By the owner of the parent company, Jonathan revealed. 90% of Sterling and Finch is owned by a holding company called Northstar Ventures. Northstar is a subsidiary of Thorne Global Holdings. The chairman of the board, the man who bought my company 12 years ago solely to create a position for his useless son-in-law, is Elias Thorne. Bryce's world collapsed. His corner office, his paycheck, his entire professional existence was a lying, expensive, 12-year hobby funded by the man he had mocked. Elias, the poor carpenter, had been his ultimate benefactor. He called me last night, Bryce, at midnight. Jonathan finished. He told me the experiment was over. He told me to cut the dead weight. You have no income, no severance, and no prospects. You are radioactive. The phone went dead. Cassandra, emerging from the bathroom, asked what happened. Bryce, his face purple with humiliation, confessed. Your father owns the company, Beatrice. He owns the building. He owns my job. He has been paying me to play executive for 12 years. The shocking realization of Elias's true identity and power, the total architectural control he had over their lives, washed over Cassandra. They had been beggars masquerading as royalty. We have to find him and beg, Cassandra whispered, desperate. He doesn't want apologies, Cassandra, Bryce replied, looking at the broken phone on the wall. He wants blood. Up in the penthouse, I closed Bryce's personnel file. The professional execution was complete. Olivia was safe. Now, I waited for the final confrontation. I sat in the high-backed leather chair of the penthouse library, watching the bank of security monitors that Arthur had set up for me on the mahogany desk. The image on screen 3 showed the main lobby of the Grand Millennium Hotel, a quiet symphony of marble, gold leaf, and hushed conversations. It was the kind of peace money buys, the kind of sanctuary that keeps the chaos of the world at bay. But that peace was about to be shattered. I saw the taxi pull up to the curb outside. It wasn't a limousine or a luxury SUV. It was a battered yellow cab, its wheel wells packed with gray slush. The door flew open before the car had even come to a complete stop, and Cassandra stepped out. She looked like a woman unraveled. Her hair, usually sprayed into a helmet of perfection, was matted and windblown. She was wearing a strange assortment of clothes, layers of designer cashmere thrown over sweatpants, as if she had grabbed whatever she could find in the dark before the security team locked her out. Bryce followed her, stumbling on the icy sidewalk. He looked worse. The arrogance that usually held his spine straight had evaporated, leaving a slumped, defeated man in a wrinkled suit that cost $4,000, but now looked like he had slept in it, which he probably had. It didn't pay the driver. I watched as Cassandra threw something at him, maybe a ring or an expensive bracelet, and ran toward the revolving doors. They burst into the lobby like a blast of cold air, carrying the scent of desperation and entitlement with them. Guests in the lounge looked up over their teacups, frowning at the intrusion. Cassandra didn't care. She had her phone in her hand, following the blue dot of the tracking app she still had installed on Olivia's phone. She marched straight to the front desk, her boots leaving wet streaks on the polished floor. "Where is he?" she screamed, slamming her hand on the marble counter. "Where's the old man?" The young woman at the desk flinched, backing away slightly. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. Don't you tell me what to do." Cassandra shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "My daughter is in this hotel. My father kidnapped her. He is a senile old man, and he is using a stolen credit card. I want you to call the police. I want you to take me to him right now." Bryce came up behind her, panting, trying to look menacing, but failing miserably. "Look, lady," he growled, pointing a shaking finger at the receptionist. "We know he is here. We tracked the phone. Elias Thorne. He is probably in one of your cheapest rooms, probably spending his retirement savings just to spite us. You need to tell us where he is before he blows our inheritance on room service." I watched them from 45 floors up, feeling a strange detachment. They still didn't get it. Even after the power cut, even after the eviction, even after the firing, they still clung to the only narrative they could understand. In their minds, I was still the poor carpenter. They thought I was burning through a meager savings account, engaging in a last-ditch act of self-destruction. They couldn't conceive that I wasn't spending my savings, but rather enjoying my dividends. They were worried about their inheritance, the money they thought they were owed, while standing in the lobby of a building that was part of their disinheritance. Arthur Harrington stepped into the frame on the monitor, moving with the fluid grace of a man who has handled drunk senators and angry rock stars. He signaled to security with a subtle nod. Two large men in dark suits materialized from the shadows, flanking the desk. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," Arthur said, his voice calm, but projecting authority across the lobby. "You are causing a disturbance. I must ask you to leave the premises immediately." "We are not leaving," Cassandra yelled, turning on him. "My father is here. Elias Thorne. He has my daughter. He is mentally unstable. He thinks he is rich. He is having a breakdown, and he is dragging us down with him." Arthur looked at her with an expression of pity that must have burned. "Mr. Thorne is a valued guest of this establishment, madam. He is certainly not unstable, and Miss Olivia Thorne is with him voluntarily. She is 18 years old. Valued guest." Bryce scoffed, a harsh, bitter sound. "He is a fraud. He drives a truck that is older than you are. He is spending money he doesn't have just to hurt us. Do you know what he did? He cut our power. He locked us out of our house. He is vicious. We demand to see him." Cassandra insisted, her eyes wild, darting around the lobby as if I might be hiding behind a potted plant. "We need to stop him before he spends everything. That is our money. That is Olivia's money." Security stepped closer. "Sir, ma'am, this is your final warning," Arthur said. My phone buzzed. It was Arthur calling from his earpiece. "Mr. Thorne," Arthur said, his voice echoing slightly through the monitor and the phone. "They're becoming aggressive. I am about to have them removed by force, and hand them over to the Minneapolis Police Department. I looked at the screen. I looked at my daughter. I saw the fear beneath the rage. I saw the confusion. If I sent them away now, they would never learn. They would spend the rest of their lives blaming the world, blaming me, blaming bad luck. They needed to see the truth. They needed to see the wizard behind the curtain so they would understand that the magic had never been magic at all, but hard work and power they had never respected. No, Arthur, I said quietly. Don't arrest them. Not yet. Send them up. Bring them to the penthouse. Let them see what they have thrown away. Very well, sir. Arthur replied. On the screen, I saw Arthur raise a hand, stopping the security guards. He leaned in and said something to Cassandra. She froze. She looked at the elevator bank, then back at Arthur, then at Bryce. Her expression shifted from anger to confusion. He is in the penthouse, Bryce asked, his voice audible on the lobby microphone. That is impossible. The penthouse is $6,000 a night. He doesn't have that kind of money. He took a second mortgage. He must have. Oh my God, Cassandra. He is leveraging the cabin. He is burning everything down. Let's go. Cassandra hissed, grabbing Bryce's arm. We have to stop him. We have to get him declared incompetent before he signs anything else. They rushed toward the elevators, ignoring Arthur, who was gesturing for them to follow him. They stabbed the call button repeatedly. When the doors opened, they practically fell inside. I turned off the monitor. I stood up and walked to the bar, pouring 3 glasses of water. I didn't pour them scotch. Scotch was for closers. Scotch was for family. They were neither. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I was wearing a charcoal gray suit tailored in Savile Row, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. My hair was combed back. I stood straight, ignoring the ache in my knees. The carpenter was gone. The father was gone. Only the chairman remained. The elevator dinged. The sound was soft, polite, and final. I turned to face the heavy double doors of the penthouse entry. I heard them arguing in the hallway, their voices muffled by the thick wood. Then the doors flew open. Cassandra stormed in, ready to scream, ready to berate, ready to take charge of her senile father. Dad, what the hell do you think you are, Dash? She stopped. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her mouth fell open. Bryce bumped into her from behind, then looked over her shoulder. They weren't looking at a confused old man in flannel. They were looking at a man in a $10,000 suit, standing in a room filled with original art, overlooking the entire city of Minneapolis with the air of a man who owned the very air they were breathing. Bryce looked at the view. He looked at the custom furniture. He looked at me. Dad, Cassandra whispered, her voice trembling, not with anger, but with a sudden, terrifying realization. Whose clothes are those? Whose apartment is this? What is this? Bryce whispered, holding up the slips of paper. North Dakota. Those are bus tickets, I said. Greyhound one way. Departing from the Central Station at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. Bryce scrambled up from the floor, trying to read the destination over her shoulder. Williston, he read, his voice shaking. North Dakota. Why North Dakota? Because that is where the work is, Bryce, I said. I made a few calls. I have a friend who runs a large-scale oil field operations out there. He owes me a favor. He is looking for roughnecks. General labor. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. It pays $22 an hour. Housing is provided in the worker dormitories. It is a warm bed and 3 hot meals a day. You want me to work on an oil rig? Bryce gasped, looking at his manicured hands. I am an executive. I have a degree in corporate strategy. You are a laborer, Bryce, I corrected him. You just haven't done an honest day's work in your life. It is time to start. And you, Cassandra, I continued, looking at my daughter. The camp needs cooks and cleaners. It is not glamorous. You won't be wearing Chanel, but you will be earning your own money. For the first time in your life, the bread you eat will be bread you bought. Cassandra threw the tickets on the floor. I am not going to North Dakota. I am not scrubbing floors. This is insane. You are insane. I will sue you. I will take half of everything you own. You will take nothing. I said, my voice hardening into steel. Because you own nothing, and you have no money for lawyers. I pointed to the handwritten note still in the box. Read the note, Cassandra. She picked it up. It was a single sheet of paper from a legal pad. I had written it while waiting for them to arrive. I owe Elias Thorne $4,600,000, she read, her voice trembling. That is your reality, I said. That is the cost of the life you stole from me. I am not going to collect it. I don't need the money, but I want you to keep that paper. I want you to look at it every morning when you wake up in that dormitory. I want you to remember that you had it all. You had a free house. You had luxury cars. You had a father who have walked through fire for you. And you threw it all away because you couldn't be bothered to be kind. Cassandra crumpled the note. You are a monster, she hissed. You are enjoying this. You are sick. No, Cassandra, I said, feeling a profound sense of calm settle over me. I'm not enjoying this. This is the hardest thing I have ever done. But I'm not a monster. I'm a mirror. I'm showing you exactly who you are. I stepped closer to them, forcing them to look me in the eye. You said I was embarrassing. You said I was a burden. You laughed at the idea of me freezing in the snow. Well, the snow is cold, Cassandra. The world is hard. And for 40 years I stood between you and that cold. I was the wall. I was the shelter. And instead of saying thank you, you try to tear the wall down. So I stepped aside. I gestured to the door. I'm not taking anything from you that is yours, I said. I'm simply taking back what is mine. My monnaie, my house, my prida, my dignity. From this moment on, you're going to live by your own merits. You're going to survive on your own strength, if you have any. Bryce looked at the tickets on the floor. He looked at the warm room. He looked at the snow swirling outside the window. He bent down slowly and picked up the tickets. He put them in his pocket. He knew. He knew it was over. He knew there were no other options. Cassandra stared at him, horrified. Bryce, what are you doing? Throw them away. We have to go, Cass, Bryce whispered, his voice hollow. We have nowhere else. I turned my back on them. It was the final dismissal. Jonathan, make sure they get to the station, I said. I heard the security guard step forward. I heard Cassandra sobbing, a low, broken sound of defeat. I heard the heavy doors open and close. When I turned around, the room was empty. The black walnut box sat on the table, empty and open. It was a coffin for a relationship that had died long ago. I walked over and closed the lid. It was done. They were gone, and I had a Christmas dinner to attend with the only family that mattered. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off Cassandra's final scream of denial. It was a sharp metallic sound that signaled the end of an era. I stood there for a moment, staring at the brushed steel surface, listening to the hum of the lift, carrying my past down to the street level. Jonathan Reed stood beside me, adjusting his cuffs, his face impassive. He had done his job. He had executed the legal amputation of a limb that had been poisoning the body for too long. I turned away from the doors. The silence in the penthouse was no longer heavy. It felt cleansed. It felt like the air after a thunderstorm when the ozone is crisp and the world feels new. Let's eat, I said simply. We moved into the dining room, where Arthur had set a table for two by the window. It wasn't a banquet. It was intimate. There were no business partners to impress. There were no social climbers to entertain. There was just a grandfather and his granddaughter. The meal was magnificent. Wagyu beef seared to perfection. Truffle mashed potatoes and roasted winter vegetables. It was the meal Cassandra had intended to serve in the dark. But here, under the soft glow of the chandelier, it tasted like victory. Olivia ate with the appetite of someone who had been living on stress and fear for months. I watched her, seeing the resemblance to her mother in the shape of her eyes, but seeing my wife in her spirit. She was kind. She was resilient. And she had chosen me when she had nothing to gain but a ride in a warm car. Grandpa, she said, putting down her fork, what happens now to the money? Everything. I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin. I looked at Jonathan, who was packing his briefcase in the corner. Jonathan, bring the binder. Jonathan approached, placing a thick black binder on the table between us. Olivia, I said, placing my hand on the cover. Tonight, I dissolve the trust that supported your parents. That money is gone. It has been reabsorbed into the main estate. But wealth does not disappear. It just changes direction. I open the binder. Effective immediately, I have established the Olivia Thorne Educational and Living Trust. It covers your tuition at Princeton in full. It provides a monthly stipend for housing and books. It is generous, but it is not infinite. Olivia looked at the documents, her eyes wide. There are conditions, I continued, my voice serious. You must maintain a 3.50 GPA. You must work a part-time job during the summers, not because you need the money, but because you need to know what it feels like to trade hours for dollars. And you cannot, under any circumstances, transfer funds to your parents. If you do, the trust dissolves. Do you understand? She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. I understand. And as for the rest of it, I said, closing the binder. The Thorne Global Holdings empire, the hotels, the logistics fleet, the land. I looked out the window at the city lights. I am leaving it all to the Thorne Foundation for Trade and Industry. Upon my death, 90% of my assets will be liquidated to fund trade schools and apprenticeship programs across the Midwest. We're going to train the next generation of carpenters, electricians, and welders. We're going to help people who work with their hands. People like I used to be. People who build things instead of destroying them. Olivia reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was strong, warm, and real. I think that is perfect, she whispered. I think that is exactly what Grandma would have wanted. We finished our meal in comfortable silence. We talked about her engineering classes. We talked about the cabin in Wyoming. We talked about the future. For the first time in years, I wasn't guarding my words. I wasn't pretending to be less than I was. I was simply Elias. After dinner, Olivia went to the guest suite to sleep, exhausted by the emotional marathon of the day. I stayed in the main room, pouring myself one last glass of water. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down. 45 floors below, the city of Minneapolis was a grid of gold and white. The snow had started to fall again, swirling in the wind, dancing between the skyscrapers. Somewhere down there, in the cold canyons of the streets, my daughter and her husband were sitting on a bus or in a shelter, holding a ticket to North Dakota and a promissory note they could never pay. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. I should have felt guilt. A father should feel guilt when his children fall. But as I watched the snow erase the world below, I felt only a profound sense of clarity. For 12 years, I had bought their love. I had paid for their smiles. I had leased their affection with houses and cars and credit cards. And the moment the payments stopped, the love evaporated. It was never real. It was a transaction, and I had been the fool paying a premium for a counterfeit product. I looked at my reflection in the glass. The suit fit perfectly. The pain in my knees was gone. I was alone in a penthouse that cost $6,000 a night. There was no noise. There was no insults. There was no one laughing at my expense. People tell you that money can't buy happiness. Maybe they are right, but money can buy distance. It can buy walls thick enough to keep out the parasites. It can buy the power to say no. I thought about the empty black walnut box. I thought about the clock tower burning in the recycling bin. I took a sip of water. The ice was cold and clean. It is better, I thought to myself, my internal voice echoing in the empty room. It is infinitely better to be alone in the cold clarity of the truth than to be surrounded by the warm, suffocating embrace of a lie. Turned away from the window. I turned away from the city. I turned away from Cassandra and Bryce. I walked toward the bedroom where the sheets were high-thread count Egyptian cotton and the silence was heavy and expensive. "Merry Christmas, Elias," I whispered to the empty room. And for the first time in a long time, I truly meant it. The most expensive lesson of my life wasn't taught in a boardroom, but in the silence of an empty penthouse. I learned that family is not defined by blood, but by character. For 12 years, I thought I was protecting them with my money, but I was only feeding their entitlement. True love isn't about shielding people from the world. Sometimes it's about letting them face the storm so they can learn to build their own shelter. I lost a daughter that night, but I regained my dignity. Never set yourself on fire just to keep ungrateful people warm. Being alone in truth is always better than being surrounded by lies. If you believe that respect is the only currency that truly matters, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Let me know in the comments below.